Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. It's a pleasure to have you with us. My name is Maider, and I am the Training Initiatives Advisor. On behalf of Basque Culinary Center, based in San Sebastian, I would like to thank you for being here today and for your interest in this webinar. We are very excited to see such a diverse audience joining us from all over the world. A warm welcome to everyone attending this session. Today's webinar is titled The Science of Flavour, Exploring Multisensory Food and Consumer Perception. First of all, we will watch an introductory video about the master's degree in sensory analysis and consumer science, which will start this October at Basque Culinary Center's new location, GOE, Gastronomy Open Ecosystem. I will introduce you to Raquel Mestre, coordinator of the master's degree, who will present our two guest speakers for today, Carlos Velasco and Charles Michel, both renowned experts in the field of multisensory experiences. So now let's begin by watching the video.
How do emotions affect the way you perceive the food? Do you know how music and colors influence your food choices? The Master in Sensory Analysis and Consumer Science offers a training in sensory analysis methodologies, equipping the students with methodologies to analyze the data, but also an understanding of those complex factors like physiological, psychological, social, cultural, and genetics that is going to have an impact in how we make choices about foods and how we perceive the flavor. This master will take place at GOE, Gastronomy Open Ecosystem, the new building of Basque Culinary Center, a center focused on research, education and entrepreneurship in the heart of Donosti San Sebastian. This master program starts from the basis of sensory analysis methodologies and statistics, but you will also be able to work with real companies through challenges. You will go to the sensory lab, train real panels, and you will meet famous speakers through master classes. If you want to participate in the first Master in Sensory Analysis and Consumer Science in Europe, enroll now.
Okay, so after watching the video, I would like to remind you that you can send us your questions in the Q&A section. After our guest presentation, we will answer them. And now I would like to introduce Raquel Mestre, coordinator of the master's degree in sensory analysis and consumer science. Hello, Raquel.
Hello, Maya, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Raquel Mestre. I'm currently working at the Basque Culinary Center, teaching sensory analysis in the bachelor. I'm also part of the coordination team of the Master in Gastronomic Sciences, and I will be the coordinator of this new Master in degree in sensory analysis and consumer science. Today's session is a space to explore how our senses, experiences, and cultural context shape the way we perceive food and how that connects to product development, innovation, and consumer preferences. We, as Mother said, we brought together two fantastic guests who approach this field from very different but complementary angles. But before we get started, just a quick note. The topics we will cover today are closely connected to the master degree in sensory analysis and consumer science, and both Carlos Velasco and Charles Michel will be speakers in the program. But I will tell you more about the program later in this session. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speakers, Carlos Velasco. Carlos is an associate professor at the Department of Marketing in the Norwegian Business School in Norway, where he co-founded the Center for Multisensory Marketing. Carlos has contributed extensively to understanding how our senses interact to shape preferences. So, Carlos, it's a pleasure to have you today. And now the stage is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Raquel. Thank you so much, Maibel, and nice to see you, Charles, as well. And thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the topics that I research and some of the topics that we are teaching at the Basque Culinary Center. In particular, I'm going to be talking about multisensory food experiences. And I'm going to end my talk on how basically the senses are increasingly meeting technology. But let me start from the very, very beginning. When we talk about multisensory food experiences, the first thing that we need to basically talk about is what is an experience? And I think this is not a trivial question to ask. For perhaps unsurprisingly, you will see that there are multiple different philosophers, food scientists, engineers, marketers discussing this question for hundreds of years. So I'm not going to go into that discussion. It's a very philosophical one. I'm going to take a very practical approach here, and I'm going to try to define experiences as we usually agree they are. So an experience is usually defined as an event or occurrence which leaves an impression on someone. But if you think carefully about that definition, on the one hand, you have an event or occurrence. Let's say you're eating a meal, perhaps in a restaurant, hearing some music. And then on the other side, there is that someone that gets an impression. But thinking carefully about this, the only way in which that someone can get that impression is through their senses. We interface with the world around us through our senses, through what we hear, what we touch, what we smell, what we taste, and much more. We know that from current psychology, biology, neuroscience, that the five traditional senses, vision, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, that's a typology that Aristotle proposed hundreds of years ago. And that is, not necessarily the most current version of the senses. Depending on who you ask, some people might say we have 15 senses, maybe 20. And it really depends on the biology, on how you look at it. Now, one of the things that we also know, from the context of experiences, now bringing the senses into consideration, is that most of our everyday life experiences are multisensory in nature. Even this specific moment, you are hearing my talk, you're also seeing my slides. Possibly you're eating something, maybe drinking something, you might be touching something with your hands, and your brains are integrating all those different cues, whether you're aware of them or not, into the experience that you have of this talk. Now, in the context of food, this is even more striking because food is perhaps one of the most multisensory experiences that we can have. And I think for most of the people that are attending now, and of course, those of us who are speaking, we know that the senses have a big impact. But the interesting part here is that we not always know how the senses affect us. Sometimes it is quite intriguing the way in which they affect us. For example, if you ask a group of experts, even experts, sometimes which senses are the ones that dominate food experiences, many people are going to say, taste, smell, very important, mouthfeel, the sense of touch. But then when it comes to touch with your hands or your body, perhaps hearing is not necessarily one that people think that is quite relevant. However, research has started to uncover, as Charles Spence, my PhD supervisor, once suggested, hearing is perhaps the forgotten flavor sense. So let me give you a quick experiment, and I want you guys to type something in the chat. I'm going to ask you a very intuitive question. It might sound even a little bit strange to some of you, but I want to ask you whether you can hear sourness. So I'm going to play two sounds for you, and I'm going to ask you to type in the chat, if possible, whether you associate the first or the second one with something sour. So here's the first sound for you. And now we're going with the second sound. So if you respond like many participants in the experiments that we have conducted and other researchers have conducted, it's most likely they're going to say the second one is something that sounds sour. It's like you can almost see the face of people going like if they had a lime or a lemon inside their mouths when they hear that sound. So actually sounds, if you think about it, sounds are ever present in our food experiences. It's very rare that we eat in full silence. And yes, sound is in many cases an extrinsic cue, but sometimes it's also an intrinsic cue, one that happens with the food, the crunchiness of the carrots that you eat in your salad, or, just think about any other mouthful property that evokes any sort of sound that then it's part of the experience. Now, One of the things that I've been proposing and that other research have been proposing is that we cannot necessarily see food experience as just the moment of eating. And this is one of the things that I've been writing about and that I continue writing about. Eating, the food experience is actually a journey. It's a journey that involves multiple different stages. Broadly speaking, you can conceptualize them as the pre-eating stage, the eating stage, and the post-purchase or the post-eating stage. But there's something that is quite intriguing here, and is that you might actually divide this into more subtle interactions. And the key word here is interactions. We go through a set of interactions around the eating event, and all of those interactions are going to influence the overall food experience journey and experience that we get from the food. So for example, when you are before eating, you might say, okay, I'm hungry. And then you go online, maybe you search for some food, you get some ads, perhaps you go to the website of a restaurant, maybe you read some reviews on Google Maps. Those elements are part of the food experience, and we call them touch points. And these touch points create a sort of like ecosystem in which people actually basically interface with the food, like that they represent. And in the end, they affect the overall food experience that people get from the event. So you have pre-eating, eating, and post-eating. At least you have different touch points, some of them at the pre-purchase or pre-eating, some of them at the eating, and some of them at the post-eating moment of the journey. And one of the things that we've been saying here is, look, all these different touch points, being it the website where you search for the food, being it Google Maps, being it the food itself, being it, the Instagram picture that you take after or during eating that later you post on Instagram, all of those are multisensory devices that are capable of transforming the eating experience. And this is the critical part here. Each and one of these touch points, you can take, for example, the packaging of a product, a food product. It has a shape, it has texture, it has temperature, it has color, it has sound, and all these different characteristics make a difference in terms of the experience that we have, and they contribute to this overall experience process. Sometimes in particular ways. I remember like one observation that one of our colleagues made once. It's like you go to buy wine and then you see people holding a bottle of wine, waiting it, then they put it back. Then they go to the next one, they wait it and they put it back. And then you observe that and you're like, why are they doing that? It's like the weight of the bottle is not telling them anything about the actual content of the wine. Yet we make like this implicit association between weight and quality perception. And you will see that if you actually weight the bottles on a shelf, those that are more expensive, you're usually the ones that have bottles with a heavier weight. So there's some interesting relationships there. So based on this that I'm telling you, we have reached like this definition with my colleague Mariana Orist at University College London, that multisensory experiences, and we can talk in this specific context about multisensory food experiences, are impressions that are formed by specific events. This could be one specific stage of the eating journey, whose sensory elements, that is the sensory elements of the different touch points that are part of this journey, have been carefully designed by someone, putting the senses at the center of the design process, using the psychology and the neuroscience of how the senses work and our brain integrates them such that we can increase the likelihood of forming an impression throughout this specific eating process. So you can see a visualization there. Of course, this is a little bit more complex as you might infer, but if you're interested in this, there is a lot of research that we're putting out there and you can later revisit it. So when I say carefully crafted by someone, there is something that is quite important to say here, and is that I don't mean that we just basically become creative and design something. We're capitalizing on the psychology and the neuroscience of how our brains combine information from different senses. So I'm going to give you 4 concepts that we use in this context, that the psychology and the neuroscience have been uncovering of how and why we integrate information from different senses. So the first one is what they call semantic congruence. And it's this idea that our brains bind information across the senses as a function of common identities or meanings. So you can see an example here. This is like a colleague of mine in Japan. He developed like this technology called meta cookie. And basically his whole principle was like, look, if it's true that we integrate information from different senses during food perception, maybe I can actually use a plain cookie. And by using augmented reality through this headset and using different smells, I can change the flavor of the cookie. And that's kind of like what he did. He developed like this VR headset with a camera, and you see like he has like this neutral cookie, the one that he has in his hand, but then he has like a smell system attached to the VR headset, and then he also has, of course, like the smells, and that means that you can basically digitally swipe the flavor of the cookie by changing the sort of colors that go with it and the smell that goes with it. So, given that, for example, a chocolate cookie looks dark potentially and also has the smell of chocolate, he uses semantic congruence to enhance the perception of chocolate. Now, we have another concept that is called cross-modal correspondences. This is a little bit more abstract, but our brains also combine information across the senses as a function of feature compatibility. So there are certain features that you can find across the senses. For example, tastes, whether something is bitter, sour, sweet, salty. And also, for example, in vision, you can also have features like curvature or symmetry or other aspects of the spatial structure of objects, could be also colors. And the thing here is that our brains also match those properties. So if you see those shapes there, that you see one shape that is kind of like round and one that is a little bit more angular, if I ask you guys which one of those two you associate with a sweet taste, it is very likely that if you respond as most of our participants, you would say that the one on the left side is the one that corresponds to something sweet, and perhaps the more angular one is something that corresponds to bitterness or sourness. So these are two concepts that we use to design food experiences, and not only in the moment of eating, but also in all these other interaction points that I've been talking about. Now, we also have other concepts, and I'm going to go briefly through these ones, but these are more concepts that we need to be aware of when designing food experiences. The first one is sensory overload. Unfortunately, it hasn't been studied as much as you would like to in the literature, at least when it comes to food perception and also multisensory experiences. But we have some evidence showing that, for example, high levels of noise can reduce the perception of certain tastes. We also have examples in the marketplace, this brand called Sun Chips, that they introduced a compostable packaging. They didn't anticipate how loud the packaging was going to be. So they had a good idea, but they had to withdraw the packaging from the marketplace because their sales dropped. The packaging was incredibly loud. You also had cases like this blue Pepsi that they launched. It was sensory overloading. Many people complain about it. It was too bright, too saturated. And the other concept is sensory dominance. Sensory dominance as this idea that, throughout this process of the experience journey, like this pre-eating, eating, and post-eating, not all the senses dominate the experience in the same way. So in the pre-eating stage, what you see is quite dramatic. It has a big impact. This is a research actually conducted by Charles Michel, and I was part of it as well, where we showed that, artistically presented salads, both at the pre-eating stage and during eating, enhance the perception of eating, and whatever you're eating at the moment just feels tastier. But for example, after eating, of course, taste and smell are not going to be the most important senses because you have already eaten. So there is something there that dominates more as a function of stage. Now, the final thing that I want to say here is we're in an age, where technology is increasingly becoming part of our lives. So as much as we continue to interface with the world around us through our senses, we are now interfacing with technologies before we interface with the world around us. So in a way, technology is becoming like a key part of the way in which we design experiences. You can see there this book, Charles and Spence and I just finished this book a couple of months ago. It's going to be out in August, and we're basically reviewing the state of the art of digital dining, like all these technologies that are transforming digital, like eating experiences. And I'm just going to give you like a preview of that. We talked a lot about these technologies that you can see here, that are technologies that hold the potential to transform eating experiences. Augmented reality, augmented virtuality, virtual reality, mixed reality. We increasingly see restaurants experimenting with immersive technologies to design new experiences. You have multiple restaurants from around the world that are doing this now. You also have the Internet of Things, these sensors that are part of our environments, and companies like Nespresso basically developing like this coffee machine that you control with just your smartphone, and you can basically customize a bunch of different features. We also have artificial intelligence powered technologies. A lot of people rushing to try to create new flavors, new recipes using artificial intelligence. And at the same time failing in the process because the human touch is still something that is quite important and I don't think we're going to replace. You actually have this case of Coca-Cola. They developed like this Coke using insights from the public and artificial intelligence. but people complain it doesn't taste as good as, basically tasting something from somebody like a human that knows what they're doing. And then last but not least, we have increasingly Web3 technologies. If you're familiar with blockchain technologies, there are people experimenting on using, for example, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, to capture data about specific characteristics of people, their taste preference, their genetic characteristics, and so on, in order for them to later people can keep their own data, but then using NFTs, they can plug into a restaurant, and then the restaurant can customize specific recipes, experiences based on their preferences. So this is a little preview. Of course, as you might imagine, there is a future that is quite interesting there, where these technologies are also increasing the ability and the control that we have over experience design, and this brings a lot of ethical challenges. I'm not going to cover these ethical challenges here, but we invite you later on to next webinars and also to the master's degree to discuss in more detail what are the ethical implications of multisensory food experience in an increasingly technologically driven environment. Thank you very much, everyone. And then I give back the word to you, Raquel.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Yeah, the ethical part of these new technologies is definitely really important. We are going to have a subject in ethics, but we can debate later about that. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our next guest, Charles Michel, with a background blending gastronomy, experimental psychology, and human-centered design. Charles offers a unique perspective connecting the sensory, the social, the scientific, and the emotional to inspire transformative change. Charles, welcome. Thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and very excited to see so many people participating in this webinar. So what I want to share today is it's actually a presentation that I shared with one of the biggest food companies in the world a few months ago, just reshuffled to the topics that we touch on during the masters with Carlos. And so this big company tasked me to help them think about how to create foods that are aligned with the challenges of the world. We're talking public health challenges, environmental health, and what we call food systems transformation, which needs to happen, right? So I thought it would be interesting to share this presentation with you all, since it touches on how crucial, fundamental it is to understand and really master sensory insights from science, but also from craft, of course, to develop better strategies for creating a better world, if you want, but really responding to the generational call around the food system, around our relationship to nature and to each other. And food design plays a very important role in that. So I'm a big advocate for that. So this is what I'll share with you. Agriculture and food is at the center of our lives. It is literally what connects us to the elements. It is central to our human civilization. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be 8 billion people on the planet if it weren't for the technologies that we've been able to develop and the approach to food system. If there's food system, all the other systems can be abundant. If our food system is failing, everything else can collapse. This is a very important reality. And right now we're living in a crucial turning point. This is one of my favorite quotes from biologist Edward O. Wilson. He says that the real problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, and that it's terribly dangerous. And now it's approaching a general crisis point. He wrote this decades ago, and I think he was spot on. Now, I want to touch on something here, is that Paleolithic emotions, which means that we have a brain, a body that evolved in nutrient-scarce environments in the Paleolithic, right, in the last 2 million years. And that is still the case today, and our bodies, and we could have a really great conversation, I think, with Carlos on this topic, that our bodies haven't yet adapted to the virtual world and to the abundance that we find in supermarkets, which often leads us to make poor decisions for ourselves. So this is kind of an approach. Here, apologies, I didn't translate this, but some of the Spanish speaking can read it. But basically, what are the existential threats that we are going through? It's about relationship to other species and the planet. It's about global food security. It's about population growth, and it's about our dependency on petrochemicals, both for agriculture and as ingredients and as medicine and as energy, right? So how do we fight climate change? And what role do we have to play, folks who often like food, are connected to food? What can we do to change this? There's one, I remember about 10 years ago, I attended this talk at Oxford by Professor Chris Lever, and he said that in the next 50 years, we will need to consume, to produce as much food as we have since the beginning of agriculture, because we're 8 to turn probably 10 billion humans. So how do we deal with this very complex conundrum? And so the key is that we just need to promote a paradigm shift in agriculture and food systems to be productive, inclusive, and adapted to climate change. This is the Food and Agriculture Organization director a few years ago who said this. And for example, we talk about climate change, and you see that the best solutions that we have, this is a drawdown project, which is probably the most comprehensive project to understand how to reverse climate change and look at the number one potential reduction of global carbon emissions. It's food, agriculture, and land use, health and education, plant-rich diets. In particular here, plant-rich diets. How do we create strategies for people to eat for large amounts of population? And this is through food design, through food technology that we can reach that. Now, this is all to give you kind of a context on how fundamental food is for sustainability and the role that we can play when it comes to sensory science or using sensory tools for food systems transformation. Ultimately, the food system is this value chain. It starts with nature, elements, agriculture, seeds, the type of farming, distribution, and transformation, which is something that we have a role to play in. Of course, the purchase experience is very important, but then it's about what happens in the mouth, the decisions, the experiences, as Carlos was saying, ultimately leading to the mind of the consumer. Of course, the body, because we need nutrients. But here, I want to make a case on why the mind is so important. Understanding the mind in flavor experience is fundamental. So now that I gave you that background, that big picture view on the importance of understanding food design, sensory design, let's dive into the sensory science, which is, let's start by defining what flavor is. So I'm going to share here a paper that we actually co-authored with Carlos about 10 years ago. It's called the fake tongue illusion. And so what it was is this, we ran an experiment where people put their heads in a box and they were looking straight at a mirror. So, right, so they put their heads here. They couldn't see what was happening under their nose, right? What they could see is the image on the right was the reflection of a tongue, right? So they had to put their tongues out like that. They didn't see what was happening underneath. They were looking at a tongue. And what we did was touch synchronously both tongues until we established the illusion that the tongue that was being seen was their tongue, which is a classical experiment in psychology. It was the first time that this was done on the tongue in this particular research. And so what we found was really, really interesting because people, after a bit, started having agency and thinking that they had agency and started feeling what the fake tongue was feeling. We also did some pre-tests with this experimental setup where we put a bit of lemon juice on the fake tongue, and some people reported feeling acidity when we touched their tongues at the same time with just a cotton tip with water. So what does that mean? It means that if the expectation, if what you see, if what you believe is correlated enough, your brain makes it real. This is something, a phenomenon that we see, that we observe in many different experimental research. What does it tell us about how we perceive food from a multisensory way? The human mind is susceptible to perceiving sensations without the corresponding physical or chemical stimuli. Has it happened to you that you're in a wine tasting and you're like, well, this smells of wine, right? I don't know. And the expert says, well, can you taste the dried prunes and the apricot seed aromas? And you're like, oh yeah, prunes, apricots, right? The word that you're hearing, and because you believe and you trust this authority person who's guiding a wine tasting, will make you feel the sensations. Your brain will connect the dots. This is very important. What we believe, we feel, can carry more weight than what we actually perceive. So if you believe that you're eating a strawberry for a variety of reasons, whether it is color, shape, texture, expectations, what you are told, if I give you something similar enough, most people will still taste strawberry. And this is not to say that we can kind of hack people's perception. It's just the way flavor works. And this is important for us as experienced designers to understand. The consumer expectations shape the experience. This is something, it's an insight that we see very often. So here I'm just sharing one paper, and the masters will probably talk about dozens of different examples of this. This is just one research that shows that really flavor happens in the theater of the mind, not just in the mouth. So here's a question for you. When in modern times, like it's say in the last couple decades, we design food, we think about it, and sensory panels are often designed to create the right mix of molecules and textures in the food product itself. And that's correct, and that needs to continue, and there's a beautiful craft in that. What I'm saying is that we need to go beyond that, beyond the physical chemical properties of food, into understanding the mental constructs that we are embedding in a food experience in order to get to a particular goal. To go back to food systems transformation, how to convince someone to eat more protein that is not necessarily an animal origin, or to eventually like the eating insects, right? Insects are a great solution for food systems, but most people are like disgusted by it, right? So how can you create a narrative, a story that helps people adapt healthier food behaviors? And this also, in terms of like how much you eat, satiety, and any other public health challenge regarding food can be addressed in a different way with a different strategy by just thinking that flavor happens in the mind, not in the mouth. Culinary art, by the nature of its expressions, depends on the psychological state of society. This is one of my favorite quotes. And truly, right now, food is changing, always changing. Everything's changes is a constant. But right now, it is responding more and more to the generational needs, right? There's a green Michelin star now in fine dining, right? There wasn't a green Michelin star 10 years ago. It is the psychological state of society changing that is making the standards of what's good appear and strengthen them. So when we look at sensory science, it helps us also understand the consumer's mind, not as a passive receiver, but as a participant in the consumption experience, someone who engages, someone who will choose the right soundtrack for a particular experience, someone who will curate the sonic environment, the tactile environment for food experiences for elderly patients in care homes, right? Or people who are in danger of being sick because of not eating certain diets, right? And so there's a possibility to transform people's behavior, and behavior shapes culture to have more sustainable and conscious practices. So where do we see the future of food? We know that there's a lot of technologies that are at our disposal today. I've spoken with people who work with big companies who have a lot of influence, whose recipes, formulations may end up, touching millions of people. And they're like, today, like this last decade, anything is possible. In terms of technology, and I'm talking about the digital, not digital, precisely, the analog technologies like foodcraft, but also food technology in the way, for example, of fermentation, using bacteria, using yeasts, regenerative agriculture, cellular agriculture, right? People think that cellular agriculture is fake food. How do we change that belief? Because it's not, and it is an important solution for reducing the global footprint of our food system as a species. So there's a lot of solutions, and I think it's important to understand that sensory design is at the heart of this shift, and there's a lot of tools that we can share with you to really design better foods for the future. It is a game of chess, food systems transformation. It is not a game of checkers. And sometimes we're like, oh, we need to reduce protein, so here's an alternative. This is not how the mind works. We need to think in strategies. We need to tell stories. We need to craft and make the best use of the available technology. And that is how I think we can reach, a better world where people are more educated about flavor, about food systems, and are participants in our stewarding of life on Earth, just beyond being consumers. So this is kind of what I wanted to share with you, and I'll leave you with this quote. The destiny of nations depend on how they feed themselves. And this is one of the first food philosophers, Brillat Savarin, who has that in his book, The Physiology of Taste. So thank you very much. And I hope this was inspiring to all of you.
Thank you very much. Really interesting. Technology is on the table again. Now we would love to hear from the public. If somebody have question for our speaker, you can type question in the Q&A box, and we have time now to answer maybe a couple of them before we go with the master presentation. I think we have one from Anok, I think that is the name. Eating rituals, presentations, timing, and tools, for example, chopsticks, hands, cutlery, influence how food is experienced sensorily. Do experimental designs often ignore the embodied and performative aspects of eating within cultural context?
I mean, I think we can both jump into that one. Maybe I can kickstart the thing. And I would say, I mean, from a research perspective, we don't ignore that. Actually, you see studies from Charles Michel and I since 2013, 14, who were basically just evaluating everything from how the weight of cutlery, influences how you assess the food, all the way to, how basically different utensils and rituals actually may transform the way in which you relate to food. In this new book that I mentioned, Charles Spence and I tried to do also something which is to trace the evolution of technology from the moment that we started basically using rocks to cut food, to just transform food, all the way to now using artificial intelligence, and what does that tell of us, as humans. So I think we do, and also culturally relevant. One of the conclusions of the book is that, in this context of standardization, creating or developing new technologies that homogenize experiences in many ways, the cultural aspect is basically what is one of the things that is not convincing people enough. So that for a technology to be successful in the context of food experience is going to have to consider the cultural aspects of it, which I think from a research perspective, we do. We run cross-cultural studies, and we try always to engage with different publics to see how culture influences the way in which we interact and perceive food. Michel?
Yeah, I would say add to that this is something also, yes, we do take that into account, but it's something that needs more research, and there's so many more ideas that can come up. There's a lot of biases in science. There's a lot of limitations. Historically, most of the science has been done by British, European, American universities with cultural contexts that are relevant to, let's say, more of the Western world. I think there's a lot to do in also exploring different cultures and differences. A third of humanity eats with their hands, and maybe that is actually healthier than eating with cutlery. Is there kind of a decision on whether that's true or not? Well, it depends on many factors, and it's an interesting question to study. And so just that, right? And we could talk about so many other aspects of eating. Ritual is very important. Food has been a ritual for most of our history as a species. We gather around the fire, we would cook, we would harvest, we would be together. It's a safety space. And nowadays, that knowledge, that wisdom about food that was pretty much common sense a few generations ago, and it was taking most of our time or working time. Nowadays, we've kind of outsourced that to the industry, which has its positive sides, like population growth, and it has its more complex sides that we need to address, like overeating or over-consuming, or carbon footprint, and all those other things that are fundamental to approach nowadays.
Thank you both. We have more questions. I think that we have time for one more. Anesha, about how to start a career in sensory science. We are going to talk about the master later. But Daniela, for example, how do you see the plant-based market growing, and what we can do to don't have like a negative connotation with vegan food?
I'll jump in on that. Don't say it's vegan. Don't say it's healthy. Don't say it's good for the environment. We actually did a pre-test research years ago where we found that telling people that something it was good for them actually lowered their expectations on how much they were going to enjoy it, and the experience was less pleasant. So this is what I mean by better strategies and narratives for food systems. If you are just putting in the vegan narrative, the plant-based narrative, only a very small part of the population will resonate with that because of their education and their experience, and the rest will not pick it up, will not even try it. So I have friends who've been doing this, just they have a plant-based, 80% plant-based offer, they're just not labeled as a vegan restaurant, and they have larger chances of someone being like, oh, I want to try this one and like it, and then adopt it into their diets. So you got to play chess, not checkers.
And maybe if I can add something on top of that, I have a couple of ongoing studies on plant-based alternatives, kind of like more in terms of products that you put in the supermarket. And one of the things that we have come to realize is that there is a lot of people trying to copy it, basically non-plant alternatives. So it's like if you have a hamburger, then you want to make a hamburger alternative based on plants. Or you want to basically just try to copy an existing experience. The question that we were wondering is, why not just design something completely new? It's like, why does it have to be the burger? Why does it have to be like an alternative to something that already exists? Maybe we have a really interesting design space there to create new products. And as Charles says, just basically use new means to engage people.
Thank you very much, both, and the public for being asking a lot of questions. Now, I would like to take a few minutes to present our new master degree in sensory analysis. Some people were asking how we can study all of this. So we are launching a new master degree in sensory analysis and consumer science. This master degree is an official proof master. That means that after this master, you could apply to an international PhD program. So the objectives of this new program is to train experts capable of applying advanced sensory analysis techniques in the development of new food products, managing research and innovation projects. And you're going to be able to understand the neurological, psychological, and sociocultural factors that influence consumer preference and decision making. And we want to prepare professionals to lead innovation in the food and gastronomy industry from a scientific and consumer-oriented perspective. As you have seen today in the presentation, sensory analysis is by itself a multidisciplinary science, and that is why we wanted to create also a multidisciplinary group of students. We already have students from nutrition, from business, from marketing, from culinary arts, and from sociology. The only thing is that if you apply from different backgrounds, maybe you have to do a complementary training before the master, but it's a master open for different background. And indeed, we want you to work in this master in multidisciplinary teams, because if you work in sensory analysis, that is what you are going to face in your future work. This is our academic program. It is divided in 5 modules. The modules are methodologies of sensory analysis, design of new products and experiences, human factors in sensory perception, research and innovation management, and the final master projects. It is in total 90 credits, and it is divided in 2 academic years. The first year is from this October to June, and the second academic year is normally from September to January, presenting your thesis on February, but it's going to depend on the company. We're going to talk about that later. So the first semester is to give you the tools and the methodological foundation of sensory analysis, with subjects such as introduction to research methodologies in sensory analysis, statistics applied to sensory analysis, sensory methodology applied to consumer studies, sensory analysis applied to R&D, and project management. In all of the subjects, you are going to have the theoretical classes, but also in Basque Culinary Center, we have learning by doing methodology. So you will be working with real case studies. And we also like to bring like really well-recognized speakers, as we have today, Carlos Velasco and Michel. So you're going to be able to know like different perspective of this science, and also to create your own network and to like build your own path in this field. In the second semester is the time for application and integration of this advanced knowledge in sensory science. So you're going to have the subjects of sensory marketing, neuroscience, psychology, and genetics, psychology and sociology applied to consumer studies, sensory panel training methodology, new technologies applied to sensory sciences, and ethics and regulation in sensory analysis. As Carlos was saying, is a really important topic in this field. And the second year is time for the final master project. That is a thesis that you are going to develop in another place. That place, it could be an university, a technological center, a marketing agency, a consultancy, and a startup, a food industry. The good part is you are going to be during the first year working in challenges with companies, knowing a lot of people. So you are going to be able to realize where you want to follow your career in this field. So if you get to this point, I think that it's because you are interested in this field or topic, but maybe you are wondering where you can apply this knowledge, or where can I work after this master program. So with this master program, we wanted to prepare like really versatile professional for the field. So you could work as a sensory analysis specialist in an R&D team in food industry, in marketing and consumer studies as a sensory marketing expert, in quality control from a maybe more like a sensory analysis perspective, in innovation, in management and consultancy, and also in academia. If you really like the research part, you could do a PhD program after this master and continue researching in the sensory analysis world. Also, it is important to mention that this master is part of Basque Culinary Center faculty from Mondragon University, but this master is going to take place in our new building, the Gastronomy Open Ecosystem. That is a new space that is going to be in the heart of San Sebastian, Donosti, and you're going to share this space with our technological center, GoEtech, and also with the master in gastronomic sciences and the master in food fermentation. So it's going to be also a really good ecosystem to meet people in the gastronomic field and build like a really strong network. And also it's important to say that it's really close to the beach. So it's going to be really cool. If you want to have more information about the program, you can scan this code, and also you can write us or call us. Also, you can write to me directly. We have until 5, so if you have more questions for our speakers or about the program, we have the time now. I think that you have been answering the question.
Yeah, I just started answering all the questions that I could as we were speaking. So yeah.
Dava says is appropriate for someone with only a culinary arts background with a scientific background. Yes, it is, because we are going to start from the basis. We have like one subject for statistics applied to sensory analysis with 8 credits. So and a lot of subjects in methodologies. So yeah, it is like a master to start from the beginning and to have like all the advanced knowledge in the second semester. So yeah, indeed, we have already people that accepted in the master that comes for a background in culinary arts. So definitely. Is there some postdoc program? We have a PhD program in gastronomic sciences also in Basque Culinary Center. Also, the students from the PhD are going to be with us in this new building. it is a similar program online. No, this program is going to be here in the, in person. For now, it's not going to be online because it's a really intense program to build like a really professional career in this topic. So yeah, from now we don't have like this option online. Oh, Dava says, how does this master differentiate itself from the gastro science degree? Okay, in Basque Culinary Center, we have the bachelor in culinary arts and gastronomy. That is, is wider. It's a bachelor. It's a bachelor that then you can specialize in food industry, in avant-garde, or in business. And also we have the master in gastronomic sciences, but the master in gastronomic sciences is more general in the sense that it's a master to have a broader perspective of gastronomy and like to research from a broader perspective, like to build a specific methodology for a specific research in gastronomy. And this master is like really specific to have a specific profile in sensory analysis. Those were the questions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Carlos and Charles, for joining us today within the webinar. And all of you that we still being a lot of people, 80 people. So thank you very much for joining us until the end. Yeah, if you want like to have more information about the program, you can write our admission team, so you can write me or Carlos or Charles to know more. Maida, if you want like to close, now the the stage is yours.
Yes, thank you, Raquel. All the presentations have been very interesting, so thank you so much. And we also want to remind you that in the coming days, we will send you the recording of this webinar, so you have the opportunity to watch it again. And thank you again, Raquel, and our guest panelists, Carlos Velasco, Charles, Michel, for participating today in this webinar. Thank you and see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.